Hi, everyone. So for those of you who have come to the Digital Qualitative Methods breakout room, uh, good to see you here. I think let's just wait maybe for another 30 seconds before we dive right in to this session, so that everyone who wants to join the session will be able to log in. What I will do now is let me just start the session so that we have enough time. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for your participation at APACC. Thank you so much for sticking around for the capacity building session. I know it's towards the end of the day for some of you. So I hope that we'll have a very productive session today. So maybe just a little bit of my own background in terms of qualitative methods. So I do have a passion for qualitative methods, and with the pandemic, and I'm sure many of you have also experienced this. It is that we have almost been forced to take up qualitative digital methods in some areas of our own research. But prior to that, there have been actually best practices that have been coming up in the literature that are really taking off during this time. So for my own work, I've done WhatsApp-based focus groups. I've done Zoom-based focus group discussions, teleconferencing software-based in-depth interviews on phone calls. And prior to the use of digital methods, definitely having all these in-depth interviews, focus group discussions, observational methods, all in person as well. And one thing that I want to kick us off with today is to really see how give you a really first-hand experience on what a online or teleconference-based focus group feels like. In order to do that, I'll spend the next 5 to 10 minutes on this topic of digital conferences, and I'll be asking some questions. What I would like everyone to do is, if it's convenient for you to turn on your cameras, I will ask for your participation. Not to worry. If it's not convenient for you, you can actually type it in the chat or unmute yourself. This is something that I also implement for some of my online focus group discussions, because something that happens is that even though you've asked participants to log in from somewhere that's conducive, sometimes your participants might not actually do that. So I give the flexibility of typing into a chat, even though it might not be the best option. Please note that this session will be recorded for the interest of other participants who might not be here but in the parallel rooms. So just wanted to let you know that, because I'll be asking some questions on your perspectives of digital conferences. It might not be related to APACC. So just wanted to let you know. But yeah, maybe we can start off first for this online focus group discussion. Welcome to our discussion today. Today's discussion, we'll be talking a little bit about digital conferences. The first question that I would like to maybe ask and kick off with is, what do you think are the benefits of having online or digital conferences? Please feel free to weigh in by unmuting yourself, or you can type it in the chat as well. Linda says, we do not have to travel. Linda, would you like to maybe expand a little bit on not needing to travel, compared to an in-person conference? How does that, how is that helpful? If anyone else also has maybe if you agree or if you disagree. All right, okay. Yes, so you can use this one over here where I see everyone typing right here on the Zoom platform. So I can see that. Okay, Rongfu says free from face-to-face interview pressure, I guess. Linda expands and says that it will save cost and time. So Rongfu, would you be able to maybe expand a little bit on what you might mean from face-to-face interview pressure? If anyone wants to agree or disagree with Linda, feel free to do that as well.
I agree with Linda.
Thank you, Annette. Anyone disagree? Maybe that would be quite interesting. Oh, Linda, you wanted to expand on something?
Yes, to join the focus group where digital things make me save cost and time to travel to the place, and we don't have to leave our work or daily life to attend the focus group. And with this way, you can draw a lot of people.
Thank you so much for that, Linda. So we see some benefits in terms of saving cost and time, free from face-to-face pressure. Rofu also adds on that I meant for the very sensitive issues such as sexual history, drug use, domestic violence. Having things online might actually take some of the pressure off of these sensitive topics. So I think those are some benefits of having things digitally. I think that refers to some digital methods. When we're talking about digital conferences, we actually do see some benefits as well in terms of the logistics of things. And I think one thing that I would do a shout out for also is that if you feel like you want to join any other of the rooms, like Dr. Wu is actually doing the digital engagement methods. Dr. Tucker is actually doing the digital trials, which is a really interesting way of actually looking at how to implement randomized control trial studies online. I think those are available rooms as well. You can actually hop off this room, go back to the conference platform that you're in, and also click on the rooms that they are running in parallel to this room. Okay, so maybe I'll just move on to my next question and last question actually before I actually cover some wrap-up points. Is what are some disadvantages that you actually see when you're attending digital conferences? What does the digital aspect serve as a disadvantage for? Great. So Dr. Stone says people are not fully engaged all the time. What does everyone think about that?
I think this is something that I think is a bit of a challenge because we are all very busy. And so right now I'm reviewing manuscripts and responding to email while I am sitting in APACC. And so it's more of a distraction in some senses that you can turn off your camera and not show yourself.
Right. Thank you so much for that. I do identify with that. Does anyone else want to add on? So Linda says, some people might not be sure about the confidentiality and what will be recorded, and that certainly is a concern. When it comes to things that are online rather than in person. And Arena says there is value if physical face-to-face interactions, like handshakes. Having body language, having that kind of interaction in terms of your physical presence. Anyone else has anything else to weigh in on? In terms of disadvantages of attending digital conferences. So Patrick says less personal interaction among delegates. Definitely something that I'm seeing as a theme that's coming up. Not being able to have that kind of a connection with other people in person. Yes, I think Yongjie raises something that's very important. You might exclude some people who have no access to digital devices. Okay, and I think these are all really awesome, really great contributions. And I think, and that says, how does this impact focus group discussion quality for those who have used this? And sorry, could I clarify? what does this refer to in terms of a focus group?
Oh, people who have used Zoom for focus group discussions and people don't turn on their cameras or watching TV out the side. Like, it's so different when you are face to face in a room. Everybody is looking at each other and gaining off the energy of each other. What happens when you are doing digital qual focus group discussion?
That's a really great question, and it's a really great segue into what I have to cover for today. So right now I'm going to move back to my slides here, and I thank everyone so much for your participation earlier. I think here are some observations that I have. So I think some of the observations I have would be, I think. And then you raise this idea of people not being engaged because cameras are off, and while this might not have been an expectation at the conference today, the expectation sometimes might not be met as well when we're conducting online focus group discussions. So I think it takes additional effort to really remind participants to be at somewhere where it is conducive. Because I've run focus group discussions before where reminder is actually sent, but participants are maybe on commuting or on public transport. That's something that we can't really control, but you can imagine how it might affect the quality of data that's being generated through a focus group discussion. Another thing that I think it was very, very useful for me to see, and I hope it was for you also, is this idea of being in an online focus group environment. As a facilitator, I think one must be very, very prepared for silence. Because compared to an in-person focus group, if you're in front of people sitting in a group in a circle, there is a certain kind of pressure that comes with it. People feel a lot more uncomfortable, or there's a greater discomfort with staring at each other and not saying anything. But with all our cameras off, I could be lying down on my sofa, I could be watching TV. It doesn't really matter. What happens online. Sometimes this is something that might be relevant for facilitators who are conducting focus groups. I think being comfortable with silence, being comfortable with conducting and facilitating groups that might not be as dynamic or interactive as in-person focus groups. And I think in the interest of time, some of these observations I'll be bringing up along the way as I bring you through the slides as well. And just a very quick primer on back to what qualitative research methods really are at the heart of it. I really love this quote. On the qualitative perspective, I think this is what James P. Bradley had said in one of his publications. He says, I want you to understand the world. I want to understand the world from your point of view. I want to know what you know in a way that you know it. I want to understand the meaning of your experience, to walk in your shoes, to feel things as you feel them, to explain things as you explain them. Will you become my teacher and help me understand? And as a qualitative researcher, this is the paradigm that sometimes that I remind myself to take, because naturally we'll bring to the table some of our preconceptions, some of our own biases, but qualitative research tends to look at the lived experiences of other people. And how does that translate into some of the methods that might be relevant to qualitative research, both digital and in person? So quantitative paradigms might be interested in quantifying things, interested in numbers, interested in statistical significance. Whereas on the flip side, qualitative methods, we can be qualified. Data can be qualified in words. There's no absolute claims. There's no claims around generalizability, because there's so much of the context that is involved in generating qualitative data, and the context involves the facilitator as well. You can imagine using the same topic guide between two people, same topic guide, you have entirely different data that's being generated from the same participants, because of the way a facilitator or an interviewer approaches the topic guide and the prompts that are being used. So you can see that it's really hard to make absolute claims and to be generalizable, but that does not take away from the strength of qualitative research in terms of generating behavioral insight as well. So these are typically specific to local phenomena, and we go really in depth into interpreting themes. When it comes to in-depth interviews and focus group discussions, definitely today's example was a focus group discussion. I really love a comment earlier around how there might be some things that are not too they are too sensitive, right? For example, questions around sex, sexual conduct, questions around domestic violence, and so on. These are where it might be a lot more appropriate to use the in-depth interviews rather than focus group discussions. And focus group discussions, on the other hand, I think are very much best suited for what you just saw happen in the chat. We see so many different ideas. We see the whole breadth of information. As opposed to an in-depth interview, what I'm getting is a whole broad range of data points that tell me the whole range of possible benefits and disadvantages of digital conferences. So you can see how focus group has that advantage over in-depth interviews, and in-depth interviews on the other hand have an advantage in terms of the depth of data and being able to be more keenly attuned to sensitive types of information. I also want this to be interactive. So at any point, please feel free to unmute yourself or raise in the chat any questions. So I see a very wonderful question on the ideal number of participants for online focus group discussions. I generally feel that based on my past few experiences, in-person interviews, we generally think about 4 to 8 participants. Some focus group discussions can go up to 12. But based on having to do all these extra things for online focus group discussions, I tend to recommend maybe like about 6, maximum of 8. And I'll show you why actually in the next few slides. So these are some things that we really, at least I have noticed, and people have started to write about in the published literature, because when we are talking about qualitative data, and because the context and the interviewer plays such a strong part in terms of generating quality data, you actually see that building rapport with your participants is such an important part of generating authentic and rigorous information and data from your focus group discussions. You can tell from the left, this is an in-depth interview. Focus group discussions will also generally be something like that. You'll be sitting across someone else. You have body language. You can see the entire person. You can see the context. But on the right, this is what you see if everyone turns on their camera. You will see different people in different settings. Just their faces. You typically don't even see their hands or their legs or the way that they dress entirely. So when it comes to building rapport, what kind of tools can we use to build rapport in this case? Because one other thing that's super important that I realized has been missing from a lot of my online focus group discussions is this. What does this look like to everyone? And do you think this is important as well? I think when I attend focus group discussions as a participant, there's always refreshments. There's always this time where you get to mingle a little bit, chit chat with people, ask people about their day, and this really helps with building rapport. But with an online focus group discussion, you don't really have that much of oh yes, sorry. If you are unless you're asking a question, if you could mute your Zoom, that would be much appreciated so that there's no background noise. Thank you so much. But yes, so back to this idea of rapport. This is something that is quite important for qualitative research. And basically, some ways that we have found to really do this, in a digital format rather than in person, is having some considerations around some of these areas. For example, with in-depth interviews, some things that are really pertinent are, what is your background like? If you're looking at my background now with my camera, if I were to unblur my background and there were a lot of distractions, what does it say about me as a facilitator or as a person? If I were to show you a background that is, maybe full of books, like full of academic books, and I'm talking to, a group that is looking at a certain topic, is it going to paint me in an unfavorable way, something that is, inaccessible? These are things that might be actually really important when you're looking at in-depth interviews. Second one is, maybe like how you're dressed. And, sometimes nowadays it's really about, how are you dressed from the chest up? Like what kind of accessories are you wearing? What can be seen on camera? And also the camera angle. These are things that help to generate certain kinds of rapport, with your participants even before you start speaking. I think one thing that goes in terms of focus group discussions that we have found useful also is to really have a very strong preparation and strong ground rules before you start for online focus groups. Because in-person focus groups, you can have ground rules also, but you have a lot more flexibility in terms of being able to manage the situation at hand in person. But for online focus groups, there are certain kinds of concerns that would arise. For example, someone earlier in the chat talked about how there might be some data privacy concerns. And I think having online focus groups, even our ethics board applications, when we're doing digital focus groups, we also have to put in new information in the participant information sheet on, instructions on whether to leave the cameras on or to turn the cameras off. For some focus group discussions that are related to, maybe STI or substance use that we've conducted before, the ethics board has said that participants must turn off their videos so that they are not identifiable, and they must use aliases. So these are some considerations to take when you are actually conducting focus groups digitally. Another thing that also is happening is there is this idea of muting and unmuting, which we actually don't do in-person interviews. I think we have to set ground rules around these. We also have to say whether you should turn on your cameras or not. In my own experience, especially around like teaching and conducting focus group discussions, we will see that actually if you turn on your camera, it's going to be a much more dynamic session than if it was not being used. One other good practice that we have seen is actually to conduct icebreakers. Because in place of building rapport in person, focus group discussions can have very good icebreakers. For example, if you don't want to be too intrusive, you can ask people to introduce their name, introduce their pronouns, their occupation. You don't have to go too much in depth into their own personal details. For more intimate groups, perhaps this is not so much of a sensitive topic. Perhaps this is a what we call natural groups, where we're doing a focus group on. These are people who already know each other. You can actually ask people to. I've seen a focus group discussion before where my colleague had asked participants to bring an item that comes from their own country to describe it. These help to really generate build some kind of rapport so that participants are a lot more comfortable speaking authentically during the interview. It's the focus group itself. In terms of in-depth interviews, I think I addressed some of this earlier. Really thinking about building rapport. Sometimes one series of in-depth interviews that I did earlier, the interviewer, was actually making sure not to show that she was taking notes during the interview, and that was actually possible because of the camera angle. So these are some things to also think about as a facilitator, or maybe when you're conducting in-depth interviews, because people can no longer see your entire body. People can only see what they see on camera. If you look at my camera right now, this is what I can show. And I have to. These are things that I wouldn't do in person. Like raise my hands up to like my head level. Body language has to be exaggerated. One comment that came earlier was that we do not have that personal touch. We aren't able to see other people's body language. So I think when it comes to digital in-depth interviews or focus group discussions, you might want to think about how you want to exaggerate some of your body language. In-person interviews, what we actually can do is to do things that are sort of to actually show that you're doing active listening, which is one of the techniques that we use for qualitative methods. With active listening, you want to show the participant that you are, listening, you're actually mirroring your understanding of what they're saying. And, typically in-person interviews, you can be looking at them in the eye, nodding your head, etc. You can actually show, you can lean forward, but these are some things that are actually not available to you online. So what can you do? So in terms of maybe what you're seeing now, I could actually try. If I'm staring at my screen, I actually look like I'm looking down. One other thing you could do is to really try and look at the camera a lot more. There's a difference between this versus this, because if I'm looking at my Zoom window, this is what I'm doing. You can also think about, nodding a lot more, think, and in person, you can actually go and do things like, like you can give affirmative voice, like a acknowledgement of what someone is saying. You can, nod your head, you can say, but when it comes to an online interview, the moment you say, and your Zoom window flashes, it almost feels a little bit disruptive. And I think that's something that we as qualitative researchers are finding difficulty around. So I think really work with what you think might be useful for yourself in terms of really generating rapport with your participants. I think one thing is you could also try and mirror other people sharing a little bit more. In the absence of body language and building rapport through your body language, you could also use this technique called mirroring, which is to really not say the exact same things back to the participant, but say things like, oh, that sounds like it must have been a really tough time, if conducting an interview on a sensitive topic, or oh, I see that there are some barriers that you are mentioning. So these kinds of like summary statements show that you are listening actively, and it helps to build rapport. Some things that are very specific to Zoom also that we find have been very interesting additions to the whole focus group discussion and qualitative mix is you would actually see that, earlier, what I had noticed was, when Linda turned on her video, I zoomed into that. When someone unmuted themselves and I saw the mic icon disappear, that was my cue to not say anything, or give that person room to talk. In an in-person interview, you might actually see people start moving in their seats, or like draw their breath. But in an online focus group discussion, these are some things that could be very useful. Waiting and looking out for people's mic icons. Things like the chat box, things like using emojis and so on. These are things that indicate some kind of invitation to really explore further certain kinds of topics or themes that are people might be engaging in. So it really changes. This is just like a brief sort of like best practices for focus group discussions, for digital in-depth interviews. I think the way that we are conducting it now online really changes a few of the different best practices that we'll have in person. And if you really want to talk a little bit more and engage a little bit more in a discussion, I'm very happy to chat beyond this session today. But I want to open the floor for questions, and I think we, even though we're supposed to end at about right about now, if you have any questions to clarify or have a discussion, feel free to do that right now. So Linda says, is the quality comparable to the in-person focus groups? What if we do in-person in some groups and online in some other groups? May not be intentional because some of them you have done before COVID and after COVID. I think I haven't seen too much data based on the COVID pandemic, but the literature actually does state that, between online teleconferencing focus group discussions and in-person ones, definitely what researchers report is some loss of depth, some loss of dynamism in terms of being able to look at interactions. I think focus group discussions, beyond just generating a broad overview of different themes, we're actually looking at norms and interactions. When we're asking questions, we can actually see how participants interact with each other, and the interaction in itself is an interesting data point. If we are hampered, based on the lack of interaction, if everyone has their camera off, you aren't able to see what people are doing, you aren't able to see someone rolling their eyes at someone else, you're not able to see how people interact, we might actually lose a very important data point. But if you're talking about maybe a research question that is really looking at, barriers and facilitators to healthcare, like a certain kind of context, maybe you won't be losing out so much on that. So it depends on your research question. And if you're looking at things that are maybe more normative and more interaction based, I think it's still you really have to do. I wouldn't say that it's not great to do online focus group discussions, but what I would say is that you have to do a lot more to make sure that you're capturing the kind of interactions that you want. Anyone has any other questions? All right. So I know it's late for for most of you. I'm very happy to chat more, beyond this capacity building session. I'm very happy. I hope that this session in itself opens up, more questions to think about, than you came prior to this capacity building session. And very happy to share some of the best practices that I've had to maybe encounter at every step of the research process. The ethics application, down to data generation and so on, and working in a team. I think Rongfu has one question. Is it necessary to ask the participants to turn their cameras on to observe their interaction? I'd say that I prefer that, because I think what is nice around today's session is you actually can see how a focus group discussion looks like without the cameras being turned on. I'd say that maybe based on your observation, you might have some observations around that. But as a facilitator, I find it a little bit tough to read the room, with everyone's camera turned off. And I'm unable to also pick out on maybe facial body language, in terms of how people react to a certain kind of a question. If someone says something funny, and everyone's camera is turned off, I won't be able to see people laughing or even smirking. And that actually would be very useful for me in an in-person focus group discussion, because what I actually would do is that I'll pick up on that, and I'll be like, oh, I see everyone has a little bit of a reaction to that, or everyone's laughing about it. Does anyone want to share why you find that funny? So I think some things like that get lost in a bit of focus group discussion where your cameras are not turned on. And I would say that when it comes to applying for a new study, and there are some ethical concerns around that, there are ways of still asking participants to turn their cameras on and attend a focus group discussion without putting them at risk. So I mean, depends on your context, depends on the topic. Just a very quick one. We conducted focus group discussions on men who have sex with men in Singapore back then. The thing about this is that actually sexual relations between men is still illegal in Singapore, and we actually face a lot of difficulty doing research in this area. And one way of going around this to conduct in-person interviews is for telling participants not to say exactly their sexual practices with other men, which you can tell is really difficult for us to do if we are trying to find out very authentic details. But another way that we have done, at least in my own research team, is we actually have a community-based organization set up the in-depth interview or the focus group discussions. This can be the online ones or the in-person ones. What happens is that the researchers do not have any personal identifiers at all, not even their emails, not even their names or their phone numbers. What we do is we just meet in the same room like this today, and in person, and basically we talk about it. My argument for the ethics process is that because following the interview, we no longer have any details of the participant. There's no way that we can actually connect any of these details to an actual person. So I think that there are some ways that might be good practices in your own context or your own country. So that's something that we have practiced, and you can figure out innovative ways as well. All right, so I think it's already 12 past 6:30 Bangkok time, and I want to thank all of you for attending the session today. Thank you so much for your time. We still have one more day full of activities tomorrow at APACC. We ask that we stick around. You can visit the posters as well. There are a great bunch of posters available where you can bookmark, you can comment on them, you can actually read through them and engage with them as well. If you are interested in getting connected, to myself, Dr. Tucker or Dr. Wu, you have our names and our bios on the website. Please feel free to get in touch with us, and we'll be seeing you around, hopefully in person sooner than later. Thank you so much.